Holy Spirit, you have gathered us together in this place with these people for your own purpose. May that purpose be made clearly known to us this morning. And may we be strengthened to live out that purpose in our lives. Amen. So this morning, I'm sure you noticed, or I'm not sure you noticed, I imagine some of you noticed, that we only have one reading when normally we have two. The reason for this is when I was working ahead, planning the readings for the various Sundays going forward, I saw this story in Luke, and I thought, all right, this is going to take time. And the other stories from the lectionary around it didn't sort of add to my understanding of this particular reading. Because this, to me, is a very strange parable that Jesus tells. And so I wanted to focus on it and see what understanding of it I could get, and then hopefully share. So just to recap, we have a master who owns a great deal of wealth, presumably. We have a manager who works for the master, and the manager is going to get fired. So the manager decides, what am I going to do? He's going to get fired because he's squandering what the master has. So the manager decides, what am I going to do? I'm too proud to beg. I'm too weak to dig. I can identify with that. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to cancel some of my master's debts so that I can make friends with his debtors. So he goes around, he finds people who owe large sums, like 100 amphorae of oil. That's a lot of oil. An amphorae is like 10 gallons or more. So take the 100 that you owe, make it 50. Just eliminate some of that debt. Take the 80 that you owe, or take the 100 that you owe, make it 80, and so on. Goes around to the debtors and cancels their debt without asking the manager. And then the manager praises him and says that he did the right thing and is impressed with him, even though what he just did was squander some of his master's wealth, which was the problem in the first place. And then Jesus talks about how some people are shrewd in dealing with the current generation, and that's to be lauded. That they understand the game and they play it. They understand the system and how to work within it. Better than children of light, better than maybe more outwardly righteous people. And then Jesus talks about faithfulness in a little. And if you're faithful with a little, you'll be given a lot to be faithful with. And if you're unfaithful with a little, you'll never get a lot because you can't be trusted. And it's just this odd story. You're going to be fired for squandering, so then you squander, so then you're rewarded, and then that's called faithful. That's, on the surface, for me, hard to understand. There are a few things that could be happening in this story that aren't spelled out in the text. Like there might have been context in the moment for Jesus and his audience that didn't get captured in the text that we have. So it could be that these were uncollectible debts. And so the manager was able to reduce some of the debt, and then it was able to be collected. Like I've done that with medical debts that we had years ago before. We negotiated down where we couldn't pay the full debt, so we paid a partial amount of that debt. And the deal was, the other option is we don't pay any of it, because we can't afford to pay it back. That's possible. It's possible the master was impressed by the manager's sudden ambition. Like suddenly he's motivated by the loss of his job, and so he goes out and he makes things happen. That's possible. It could be that the manager earned the master a lot of goodwill. Because they thought, oh, what a generous master who's canceling some of our debt. We like him more now. He's not just the guy who holds our debts. He's friendly, he's merciful. None of that is spelled out in the text. It's all possible. But again, it isn't obvious the connection that Jesus is drawing here. It seems that the manager is going to be fired for being dishonest. He continues to be dishonest. He's rewarded for that and then praised for his faithfulness. Held up as an example for us. for me it was helpful to take a step back from the story and to look at the system that this person was part of. The debt system in the ancient world and how debt worked in Judea in Jesus' time. And then it got me thinking about how debt works in our time. And I went from there. So, does anybody know how taxes were collected in ancient Rome? I wouldn't expect you to, but it's nuts. So you have a district, and the district owes X taxes. And so the governor of that district takes that tax debt and puts it up at auction. And then a bunch of financial speculators, probably his friends and fellow nobility, bid on that tax debt. And whoever wins the auction is now the owner of that debt. And they can collect whatever they want. As long as they collect that debt and send it to Rome, they can collect whatever additional debt they can. And while they do that, they have the Roman military to back them up. They're not just asking nicely. They have soldiers behind them when they come and collect. This was how taxes were collected throughout Rome. Does anybody dislike the IRS? My hands, you may not want to wave your arms, they might come for you, right? If you dislike the IRS, you would hate Roman tax collectors. Because at least the IRS has a system for what you owe. In Rome, someone knocks on your door and says, I know you owed this last year, you owe this year, because I said so. And if you don't, this guy will stab you. That was how taxes were collected everywhere in Rome. That was how debt was managed. Public debt was a private investment. Rome had already figured this out, and we're not doing anything amazing now. We know from Jesus' stories that he told that it was a common occurrence for someone of higher station to backhand in the face someone of lower station who got in their way. Remember the turn the other cheek story? Jesus tells this story about turning the other cheek, and it's familiar to his audience. They know what he's talking about when he says the right cheek versus the left cheek, offer your other cheek also. It's because it was that common to just get slapped in the face in the street because you didn't get out of the way of a wealthier person fast enough. It was also common practice with going the extra mile it was legal to force you at sword point to carry a Roman soldier's 60 to 80 pound combat pack for a mile. So the occupying force that maybe was helping collect taxes last week makes you carry their heavy bag. It was common back then for someone who owed money to be taken to court, and if they couldn't pay and they had no property and they wouldn't sell themselves into slavery, the judge would say, okay, we're going to take your tunic. So you literally take the clothing off of the poor person's back to give to the person who held their debt. It's just that legally you had to give it back at sundown because they had nothing else to sleep in. That tunic was their blanket and their bed because they were sleeping on the street. Again, these were common examples of how debtors were treated, how people were treated during this time. I mentioned debt slavery. This was very common by the 1st and 2nd century in Rome because the Roman Empire had stopped expanding. They used to get slaves by going and conquering a new country, and whoever they conquered, they'd take all the able-bodied people and make them slaves. So there was a constant influx of slaves in different conquests. By Jesus' time, Rome had stopped expanding so much, so then the demand for slaves go up. Because they're used to a society where 40 to 60% of a city's population might have been slaves. And there's not that steady flow of slaves anymore, so what do? Push people into debt, and then give them the option of selling themselves or their children into slavery. And so as a debtor, if you couldn't pay your debt, it was very common to sell your child to a wealthier neighbor or to the person you owed as a way to pay that debt. These were all common practices during this time. And when I remembered this and read a little bit more about it and thought about it, it gave me a different way of looking at it. Jesus praising this manager for canceling all these debts. What about in our own time? Surely we've learned better since then, right? Well, I have a few examples of how debt works in our system as well. So here's one. You may have heard of this scandal where parents were paying and bribing people to get their kids into better schools, right? So they'd Photoshop someone into a swim meet and say, my kid's a great swimmer. Or they would pay to just a straight bribe to raise someone's SAT scores. So one of those people paid $15,000 to raise her child's SAT score so her child could get into a better school. She was caught. And now, recently, it's come out that she's going to spend 14 days in prison. As people were looking at stories like this, they found another story of a woman who was homeless at the time, and she wrote down someone else's address as her address so that her child could go to school. Now, this person, when they were caught, was charged with grand larceny. What they said was that she had stolen $15,000 from her city because that was the cost of educating her child for a year. And so she was charged with grand larceny for doing this and convicted of that. And she sold drugs at 2 instances. So for that combination of crimes, she had a plea deal and she's going to spend 5 years in prison. Her babysitter, who's the person who provided the address for her, was evicted from her public housing. What that means is she is now homeless, because if you're in public housing and you're evicted, you go to the bottom of the list of people to receive public housing. And presumably, if you're in public housing, it's not because you like it, it's because you need it. So that's a big difference that I could give as examples. The private bail system is another crazy example, okay? So when you're arrested, you go to jail, and then if you're charged with a crime, they're going to keep you in jail until your court date, which could be 9, 12 months in the future. But a judge eventually sets a bail. What that means is if you give this amount of money, you can get out of jail and go home and wait at home or go to work while you're waiting for your trial. Bail is often very high. $100,000 bail is pretty common. So if you're very wealthy and you're arrested, let's assume you're innocent, but you're arrested, you're accused of a crime you didn't commit. But if you have the money, you can pay $100,000 and go home today. And even if you're found guilty later, you get the $100,000 back. Now let's say you're not as wealthy. So you can't pay the $100,000, so you go to a bail bondsman and you pay them $10,000. 10% of your bail, you get to go home. But even if you're found innocent, you never get that $10,000 back. Did you know that? That's crazy. I learned that this week. Now let's say you're very poor and you can't work. You're as poor as me. I don't have $10,000. So let's say you're poor and you don't even have $10,000. So you stay in jail. Month after month after month, and you can't make car payments, so you lose your car. You can't make rent payments, so you lose your car. And your family maybe can't support themselves without your income, so they're on the street. Month after month after month. You're innocent, but you're in jail, you can't get out. And so your public defender comes to you and says, listen, you can either stay in jail until you have a court date, it's probably going to be 12 months from now, or you can plead guilty to the crime you didn't commit, and you can go home sooner. What are you going to do? Remember, this public defender doesn't know your name because they have 500 other cases this month. You plead guilty to the crime, and you go home. Did you know that 90% of people in prison never got to trial? 90% of people serving in prison right now never had a trial. Because what happened was, they took a plea deal. Now, were some of them guilty? I assume so. Were all of them guilty? I assume not. In 2017, there were just shy of 800,000 bankruptcies declared because of medical debt. Do you know where else in the world that happens? Nowhere. Nowhere. Or we talked about this before. If you already have money and assets and you want to get a loan, it's pretty straightforward. I've done it many times. Student loans, car loans, all that kind of stuff, right? If you don't have money and assets and you want to get a loan, you go to a payday loan place. And the average interest rate for a payday loan place is 391%. That's if you pay it back after 2 weeks. If you take longer than 2 weeks to pay it back, which a majority of people do, it jumps up to over 500% and then can reach 1,000%. Some states have stepped in and set it up a limit at only 700% payday loan interest. Isn't that common? So if you don't need the money as bad, it's easy to get. If you need the money real bad, it's hard to get. These are just examples using debt. There are other examples I could bring up using gender, sexual orientation, race, all those different categories. These are just debt categories. How different parts of our system, just the ones I found, there are more, different parts of our system, how they work. So in Jesus' parable, the way I read it is that Jesus is the master, and that we are to be the managers, I think. And so Jesus is encouraging us to be, the word in the English text is shrewd. To be shrewd. And even, because he's described also as dishonest. Because what this manager is doing is what we might call gaming the system. He's bending the rules, going outside how things are supposed to work for his benefit. Now, my experience is that I have not had to game the system very often. That's largely because the system is made to benefit me. It was made by people who are similar to me, to benefit people who are similar to me. So I often have to be reminded of other people's experiences for whom the system wasn't made to benefit, and how they have to game the system sometimes. And I've had this conversation many times with people, I will have it many times again, about people who game the system. This especially comes up in like nonprofit work, where they're working with people experiencing homelessness or people in poverty. They aren't always entirely forthcoming about their circumstances. They don't always tell you all the other things that they might have received. They might do things to kind of try to double dip, or to get some extra benefit that maybe they're not supposed to get. And I've had this conversation many times. People get really offended and upset when this happens. Sometimes when you catch someone gaming the system, you then kind of cut them out and, okay, we're not going to help them anymore because we know they can't trust it. Right? We have a system in place and they're not using it. But what about people who are gaming an unjust system? What if people are breaking the rules that are themselves unfair? What do we call someone who does that? Do we call them like a modern day Robin Hood? Do we call them a criminal? A hero? A cheat? A survivor? Jesus was pretty consistent on this idea that people are more important than laws. And he says this with reference to civic laws, and he says this with reference to religious laws as well. When it comes down to it, if you can either serve a person or serve a law, you should serve a person. If that's where the choice comes down to, I think that Jesus consistently lands on the person's side. Not to break every law for no reason, or out of pure selfishness. But if it comes to it, I can either follow the rule or help the person. I should help the person. It's also worth mentioning that we are sitting in this room, most of us who identify as Christian, I assume. And one of the big things about Christianity from the very beginning is that we acknowledge We are here. We are allowed to come into God's presence. We are allowed to be part of the kingdom of God because we could not pay our debt. And that debt was forgiven for us. We are not here because we are able to pay our debts. We are not here because we are able to live by every rule that exists in this system. We are here because we are unable to pay our debts, and they are forgiven anyway. This is central to our identity as Christians. We can't flip very far in this thing before we find this all out. And so I think that's worth remembering. Now, does everyone who gains the system do so out of faithfulness to Jesus Christ or to serve their fellow human beings? Of course not. That's not what I'm saying. There are certainly many people who do so for selfish reasons. There are also many people who do so just to survive, because the system wasn't made for them and they have to get by anyway. So remembering that, I think that we could be gracious. When we hear of someone who is gaining a system, who is bending rules, who is not being entirely forthcoming, maybe just remember these things. But we are also here because we could not follow all the rules either. And grace was shown to us. And so in some circumstances, it may be perfectly appropriate to show grace to others. But sometimes, coming from this reading, as I'm understanding it, in order to be faithful to Jesus, and in order to be faithful to his priorities, it's going to mean that we too may need to gain the system.